and this will be fun. This is one of those clips that gets posted on the internet, and I get flogged in 5 years. So we'll just talk about it. It's fine because everybody wants to know like water's impact on protein digestion and also the impact on kidneys. So I'm just going to go ahead and just debunk this real quick in case anybody's thinking about it. Because you might be thinking this when you join DK right away and you're like, 150 grams of protein a day, isn't that terrible for my kidneys? Here's where this comes from. Where this comes from is studies where they've added a high protein diet for people, right? There's an increase in renal activity, meaning your kidneys are working harder than they normally were. Which, if we just think about this logically for a second, if you were somebody that was only eating 50 grams of protein a day and now all of a sudden you're eating 150 grams of protein, does it or does it not make sense that your kidneys would then be working harder than they had been? Of course, you're having 3 grams of protein, right? The problem is that gets attributed as bad. It's not bad, it just is. Just is, right? So people notice a increase in renal activity when you increase protein intake, but that does not mean it's bad. So it gets reported, well, there's an increase in renal activity. And it does sound scary. Like when I hear that, I'm like, ooh, increase in renal activity. Like I'm not a doctor guy. So it's like you hear that, you're like, oh, it's kind of scary. All that means is that the kidneys, there's more activity in the kidneys than there normally was. However, here's the other part that happens. After a certain amount of period or a certain amount of time, and usually this works out to like 14 to 21 days in most of these studies, is after 14 to 21 days, the renal activity regulates back to where it was. Why does that happen? Because your body has now adjusted to the new protein intake. Right? So your body adapts. Right? There's a SAID principle. It's called the SAID principle. Specific adaptations imposed. Right? Your body will adapt to what you impose upon it. So if you impose a high protein diet, there will be a spike in renal activity. It will then regulate because your body is adapted to it. This same exact thing, if you guys look into this, and feel free to look into this, I want people to check me on this. It's fine. The same thing happens in your liver when people go to a high carbohydrate diet. So when people are coming off of keto, low carb, and they go on to high carb, right? There's a spike in glycogen activity, right? And in your liver activity, because it's usually the one responsible for processing the carbohydrates and the glucose. So the same thing happens. But you don't hear people up in arms about that, right? You just don't. It's not as frequent. But it's the same thing that happens. So if you watch liver activity when somebody comes off of ketogenesis, right, or a keto diet, and they implement carbohydrates, a high carbohydrate diet back, you'll watch their liver activity go up for 14 to 21 days, and then it will regulate after your body has adapted to the new imposed demands. It's the same thing. It happens when you introduce high protein, happens when you introduce high carbohydrate, happens in the kidneys, happens in the liver. It happens, right? It's just your body adapting, right? So there's kind of this misattribution, right? Now, when there are cases of actual direct reportings of kidney damage correlated with protein intake, it only happens in really extreme cases of protein intake. And when I say extreme, what I mean is like when we're breaching like 2 to 3 grams per pound of your body weight. So if you weigh 150 pounds and you're eating 300 to 450 grams of protein a day, bro, yeah, you should probably relax. But nobody's going to do that. It's insane. You're going to be fooled, right? Like, it's actually really hard to do that. Like, that would be an insane food challenge to actually eat. If you're a 150-pound guy, to eat 300 grams of protein, like, that would actually be really hard to do. Like, you would be fooled, chances are. And then you'd have to repeat that for a long time period for it to actually cause damage. Because one instance of that is not going to cause damage, right? It's like if you smoke one cigarette, it's not going to give you lung cancer. But if you're smoking a bunch of cigarettes every single day for a long time period, yeah, you're setting yourself up. Same thing. If you have one day of 450 grams of protein, you're not going to go into kidney failure, right? Right? You're not going to permanently damage your kidneys. But if you do that every day for a long period of time, yeah, it's probably going to cause issues. So can it cause kidney damage? Technically, yes, but the circumstances in which that's going to happen is very, very rare. And it's often just a misattribution of renal activity. So that's the summary of like, does protein damage our kidneys? The answer is like, technically, yes, it could if you go to the extremes and you stick to the extremes for a long period of time. But it's so unlikely that you do that that we can basically say, don't worry about it. If you're in DK and you have CKD already, chronic kidney disease, or you've already had a kidney removed, like this has happened. We've worked with guys who come in where they've already had CKD and maybe they've already had it surgically removed. You should probably tell us that right away and put it on your intake form. Like there's a reason that we say, is there anything medically we need to be aware of on the intake form? Like there's a reason that that's on there. So that one is one of those ones where I'm like, well, yeah, if you have one kidney, now we need to look at this through a different lens. And if you already have CKD, yeah, we need to take it a little bit more serious than the average guy. But we should probably be aware of that. So if you happen to be in here and that's you, or you're watching this recording, that's you, like obviously let us know immediately so we can help you adjust your protein intake accordingly. But for most of you guys, most of the people watching this, 95 to 99% of people, you can pretty much chalk that up as a wash. Right? You don't necessarily need to worry about it, right? Because we're not going to assign you 2 to 3 grams of protein per pound of your body weight anyways. Never going to happen, right? Does that make sense? Does that put some of you guys at ease or at least give you clarity on why this has ever been a thing? Protein damaging kidneys. That might be news to some of you guys. I don't know. Have you guys heard that before? Like, I know you guys have heard that protein is bad for your kidneys, but have you heard the reason why this and where this comes from?
No, I mean, I've never heard anything about high intake for any kind of kidney damage.
Yeah. Dude, it's like I get that question a lot. Like when guys get
Uh,
calls to join DK, like it's a real like objection people have to doing DK and like doing our dieting set. They're like, well, like, isn't that bad for your kidneys? I'm like, well, let's talk about it. Like, well, this is gonna take me 20 minutes, but I can explain it away for you, but it'll take some time. But it is a real thing, man. People do have concerns about that. Dean, what were you gonna say, brother?
Oh no, I heard that it was bad for your kidneys, but then I read a counter article where the guy said if you look at the data, it's only bad for your kidneys if you already have kidney disease. So
Yeah.
I kind of went, yep, well that there we go.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, and that's pretty much how it goes, right? It's like exactly what I was saying. If you already have CKD, yeah, like we need to have a conversation, right? But honestly, I'm thinking about one guy in particular, and he's not in the group anymore. And like I won't say his name, obviously, in case you guys know him for some reason. But like we were working closely with his doctor, and we were monitoring his all of his blood work and stuff, and we still had him at the same protein levels that we would have for a guy that had 2 kidneys, and all of his blood levels were fine. Because we're not putting you in an extreme protein intake. All of you guys are going to be anywhere from 0.7 ish to 1.0 grams per pound of your goal body weight. Your goal body weight. So if you're 250 and need to be 200, that means the most protein you'd ever have assigned to you is 200. So we're so far from towing that line of like 2 to 3 grams of your current body weight that like it's just never even going to be an issue. Even if you do have CKD, I need to know that. Like as a service provider, I need to know that. And for there's a reason you guys have to sign a waiver too, right? We need to know that, right? But even in that situation where we're working like intimately with his doctor, like we were just watching the blood work and we just slowly crept up the protein, but we got to a point where he was at the same amount that he would be even if we didn't know he had CKD. We just had to approach it with more caution and be slower about increasing it. We're not just going to jack it up and be like, here you go, man. Hopefully nothing happens. Like, obviously, no, we're going to watch that, do blood work, and make sure he's good. But yeah, man, it's usually going to happen in a case where somebody already has it. And like, even then, you're probably fine with the standards that we use around here. Right.